Picture an ancient city. You're probably imagining chaos, filth, and misery. We tend to assume that 2,000 years ago, people were barely surviving in open sewers, struggling toward the light of the modern world. But then, you look at the numbers. In the 1st century AD, the city of Rome was pumping 1 billion liters of fresh water into its streets, every single day. That is more water per citizen than is currently provided to the residents of New York City. If they were so primitive, how did they achieve something we still struggle to match? This is no history. And today, we aren't just looking at ancient ruins. We are going to dismantle the myth of the primitive past. Because the truth is, they didn't live in the mud. They lived a life that was, in many ways, surprisingly like our own. I grew up with a very specific image of the ancient world. Movies and textbooks told me that before the Industrial Revolution, life was, well, gross. We assume that technology equals progress, and the logic seems sound. No electricity implies darkness. No antibiotics implies constant sickness. No internet implies ignorance. So, naturally, we view ancient cities as nothing more than large-scale survival camps. We imagine people working from sunrise to sunset just to eat, dying at 30, and never leaving their 10-mile radius. It makes us feel good about ourselves. It validates our modern world to believe we are the pinnacle of comfort and sophistication. I believed this too, until I started looking at the infrastructure. Because when you actually dig into the foundations of a city like Rome, or Chang'an, or Mohenjo-Daro, the primitive narrative falls apart. There is a massive contradiction buried in the ground, and it starts with that water. Let's go back to that number, 1 billion liters. To understand how impossible this sounds, you have to understand the engineering. Rome didn't rely on electric pumps. They relied primarily on gravity. Roman engineers built channels that sloped downward at a gradient of just a few inches per mile, for 50 miles. If they were too steep, the water would blow out the walls. Too shallow, and the water would stagnate. They hit this mathematical perfection 11 times over. But here is the question that bothered me. Why? Why bring that much water into a city if people are just surviving? You don't need 1 billion liters for drinking, you need it for a lifestyle. This water system wasn't for survival, it was for luxury. It powered decorative fountains on every corner. It flushed a complex sewer system called the Cloaca Maxima that is still functioning today. And most importantly, it fueled a daily culture of hygiene and leisure that rivals our own. So, if we were wrong about the water, what else did we get wrong? To find out, we need to walk through a day in the life of an average citizen. Let's imagine it's the year 125 AD. You wake up, but you aren't in a mud hut. You are on the 6th floor of a high-rise apartment building called an insula. This is one of the biggest shocks for people new to Roman history. Rome wasn't a sprawling village, it was a vertical city. These buildings had balconies, wooden shutters to block the street noise, and yes, landlords. Ancient writers like Juvenal even complained about the noise and the shoddy construction. The problems they faced weren't primitive survival issues, they were modern urban issues. High rent, noise pollution, the fear of fire. Now, it's lunchtime. You're hungry. You assume you have to start a fire and cook some grain, right? Wrong. You head to the corner. This is a thermopolium. Archaeologists have excavated over 150 of these in Pompeii alone. These are fast food joints. Literally. Most Romans living in apartments didn't have kitchens. It was too dangerous. So, they ate out. Every day. They grabbed hot sausage, lentils, and spiced wine on the go. In fact, for the working class, dining out was often a daily necessity. surprisingly similar to modern city living. Convenience wasn't invented in the 20th century, it was perfected 2,000 years ago. So, you've eaten. Now, back to work? Actually, maybe not. This is where the primitive myth really breaks down. We assume ancient people worked themselves to death,
But the Roman calendar was filled with religious festivals, over 100 days a year where public business often paused. Even on standard work days, many businesses closed in the early afternoon. Why? Because the remaining hours were for the most important daily ritual of all, the baths. These weren't just tubs, they were massive leisure complexes that held thousands of people. Imagine a combination of a gym, a spa, a public library, and a community center. And it was cheap, essentially free, for everyone, even the poor. This was where business was done, where politics were debated, where the city actually lived. They had central heating in these floors, called hypocausts. They even used glazed windows to trap the heat, creating a greenhouse effect. They had a work-life balance that many of us would envy. So, high-rise living, fast food, frequent holidays, public leisure. Does this sound like a primitive struggle for survival? Or does it sound like a civilization that had solved the basic problems of being human? And that's when I realized the truth. Ancient Romans didn't dream of our cities. We rebuilt what they already had. The story of urban history isn't a straight line from bad to good. It's a U-shape. When the Roman systems collapsed, we didn't just lose an empire. We lost a standard of living. It took London 1,800 years to match the population density of Rome. It took until the 19th century for European cities to regain the water quality Rome had in the 1st century. We look at the past and see primitive because we confuse technology with civilization. We have better gadgets, we have antibiotics, we have the internet. But as a social organism, as a way of living together in a dense space, they were arguably better at it than we are. They prioritized public leisure over private hoarding. They prioritized social cohesion over endless productivity. They built cities designed for people, not for machines. This changes how we see history. We tend to think that because we came later, we must be smarter. But progress is not a guarantee. Civilizations can solve problems that future generations will forget how to solve. The Romans solved the problem of urban loneliness. They solved the problem of public access to luxury. And when their pipes ran dry, we forgot that living like that was even possible. This city, with its fast food, its heating, and its holidays, reminds us that history doesn't just move forward. It moves in cycles. And sometimes, looking back isn't about nostalgia. It's about remembering what we're capable of. This story reminds us that progress isn't linear. Every age solves some problems while creating others. But if they had better water and more holidays, what other primitive cultures have we underestimated? I'm here to help you know the builders of the past. What modern convenience do you think you'd miss the most in ancient Rome? Tell me in the comments. See you at the next excavation.